My name is Jennifer Ochoa, and I want to talk today about developing text-dependent questions. And if you're like many of the schools across the country, you've probably been working hard the last year to develop text-dependent questions that have to do with the pieces that you read with your kids. And so in my school, that's what we've been doing for the last year. We've been really trying to work on that. And the journey of our text-dependent questions began last spring when we were given the task of creating text-dependent questions for the stuff that we read with the kids in the middle school that I teach in. And my teaching partner, Lindsay, and I said, well, don't we already do that? Don't we already create text-dependent questions? I mean, what kind of questions are we asking the kids? And in fact, we found out we were not. The New York City Department of Education gave us a guide, actually, that was called Developing Text-Dependent Questions, and it had 7 steps. And so we got to looking at the 7 steps, and we got really, really worried. Some of the steps were things like start small to build confidence, but there was no space in the 7 steps for the kids' thinking, for their questions, for what they were wondering about. And there was really no space in the 7 questions for the kids at all. And so we got really worried about that, and we turned to the gurus. Around that time, Kylie Beers said that she was really worried that an overdependence on text-based question would create a generation of teacher-dependent kids. And Lindsay and I happened to be reading Kelly Gallagher, and we thought, okay, we'll borrow his first and second draft reading. And could that work? Could building a framework for kids of thinking questions to help them move themselves through a really hard text be what they could use to develop their own kinds of questioning skills? And so that's what we did. In a first draft reading, the framework for a first draft reading that we gave to the kids, we said, this is just when you're getting right down into the text. What's going on? What's happening? What words don't you know? What questions do you have? And we said to them, these are thinking questions. They're the questions that help you think your way through. But we also wanted to make really clear to the kids that thinkers track their thoughts. And the way that they do that is they write right on the paper. They jot their notes. Some teachers call it annotating. They make marks on their paper. And then when you go back after a first draft reading into a second draft reading, you ask questions about what's really, really going on. You ask, what's the author's stance? What's my stance as the reader? What do I understand better now that I didn't understand before? And what new questions have emerged for me now that I thought about it? And maybe even talked about it with other people. Of course, we had to show them what a teacher's first and second draft writing looked like, and we showed them it was messy, it was scribbly, and it often had 2 different colors, which if you're in 8th grade, the more school supplies you can use, the better. So they were all about the 2 colors. And then we had to say, like, what is going deeper in a text look like? Well, it means you ask Gwendolyn Brooks eating a book on a first draft reading, but the second time you go through and you go, oh, she's creating a metaphor for me. People don't really eat books. They're using that as a way to think about going deeper. What was weird was that the kids who were usually really, really good at reading, they gathered all the thinking questions and they wrote them at the end of the paper literally and answered them. But the kids who were bad at reading, or normally bad at reading, historically bad at reading, they were all like, I can write my questions down because I have lots. And their papers were messy and completely filled with all kinds of thoughtful questions as they moved their way through the harder texts. We needed lots of practice. At the beginning, they were staying really close to the making sense zone. They were all like, what's happening, what's happening, what's happening? And every once in a while, a deeper question would kind of pull their way in there. But then they did actually start to develop some notions of creating stances and noticing the author's stances. And it was interesting because what they noticed about that was they noticed that in being able to look at the different stances of the author and themselves, they were able to make more inferences. What kinds of questions did they ask? Well, they asked a lot of, comprehension kind of questions. What's going on? What's happening? They started to lift out vocabulary, which was actually one of the 7 steps that they gave teachers. But then they started to ask kind of deeper questions that were more inferencing questions, questions that would help them think about stances, develop stances, and then have them understand that the piece of work lived in their brain and into the world. Were they writing text-dependent questions? Actually, as we looked at it, they totally were. They were following the 7 steps that the Department of Education gave us without us telling them. They were asking questions that they were doing a lot of writing around the tough parts. So was the framework helpful? It sure was. It helped them go way more deeply into what they were reading. They had these thinking questions to use and follow their way through. And by the end, like this week, They were asking great questions. So what did I learn from this? I don't need a 7-step guide to create text-dependent questions from the New York City Department of Education. I just needed 25 kids in my class and the thinking frameworks and their pencil.